have two notes I was going to say. In the research we read that he was 11 when he lost both his fingers.
What's that?
That he was 11 years old, Brady, when he lost both his fingers. That's what we read. I don't know if it was true or not, but in somebody's notes.
I don't think that's right. I think he was an adult.
Britt, Philip always showed me that one machine. I've seen it
Yeah.
more than once. I could show you.
Yeah.
And he said, that's the machine. That's what Philip
So
said.
he would have had to have been an adult.
Another thing, he used to shoot to wake people up. I don't know if you remember that, Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to tell him a bathroom story.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, this house was built in 1882. And since my grandmother had already been dead, when my mother and father were married, they first moved in here with Brady. Well, as you can see, it's a fairly large house. You'd think it'd be big enough for 3 people, but when one of them's Brady, it wasn't going to work. But at that time, even though it was 1952 or 1953, my dad used to always joke that we never did anything real quick because you're just always afraid it's just going to be a fad. So by 1952, but electricity came late to rural Indiana. A lot of people don't realize, but this house still didn't have indoor plumbing or anything. It would have still been the way it was living in the olden time. And you have to go to the bathroom, you have to take the little path down the, out to the little house out in the back, and the little outhouse. Well, by the 1950s, most people had indoor plumbing. And my mother kind of wanted indoor plumbing. And my grandpa, Brady, he wasn't interested in indoor plumbing. He thought that, he still didn't want to bother getting it. Well, when he went to the fall shoot in October, he would camp out in Friendship, Indiana with all his buddies, and that was their big thing. So while he was gone, my dad put indoor plumbing in his house. And when Brady came back, he was very mad, because he did it without his permission. And so Brady never used the indoor plumbing. He still would use the outhouse. The way my mother told it, you never know how long it's going to take a guy to not be mad, but she said sometime after Christmas into the next year, like in January, it was really, really cold out. And she was sitting in one of these rooms, I don't know which room, but with my father. And since only 3 of them lived here, they heard the toilet flush. And she said from then on, Brady never used the outdoor at all, and never said anything about it either. Never mentioned it again. Never, just didn't mention that he was upset with them putting the indoor plumbing in. So maybe he figured out it wasn't just going to be a fad, and they wouldn't have to go to the expense of removing it from the house when people decided to do away with their indoor plumbing.
Now, let me elaborate on the bathroom. First off, the outhouse where it came from. Brady bought, was it 3 or 4 or 5 outhouses? And when you bought them was after the Depression, during the Depression. One of the work projects was build outhouses. And to build an outhouse, is the WPA, it's called a Roosevelt, because it's Franklin Roosevelt. And that was a project went on here. Projects went on all over the whole United States, like the Hoover Dam, Tennessee Valley, but we got the outhouse project. So a lot of these people in rural America, Kentucky and all, they bought these outhouses. And what there was a cement base, and I think he bought 5, because he had different properties, and I don't know how many, but we still have one. And it's just interesting to know that that's what they did for a project, because some people might go, well, that's not a very good project. That sounds kind of stupid. But here's why it's not stupid. Because back in the olden days, and these people get old, and they go to outhouse, they just had makeshift outhouses. They're pretty makeshift, some of these old rickety things, and they got wooden floors and they rot out. And they had cases where old people, or anybody, fell through the outhouse and couldn't get out and died. So that's why they made the outhouse base out of cement and had the crew come in, and they'd make the outhouse.
We still have one.
And we still
There's
got
a Roosevelt out there still. You can use it before you leave.
You gotta watch out for snakes and all that, don't you? That's the legend. You always, and Brady and the snake, would you want to elaborate on that one?
I don't know if I know it, Tony.
Didn't Brady have a snake live with him in his room?
Oh, well, the snake was really owned by the Rogers boys, by Betty's kids, when they lived here. Yeah, so you know the kind of the history of the way that worked. Brady lived here all by himself until, oh, maybe 1964, and he fell, and then he was in a wheelchair. And so his oldest daughter Betty and her family moved in and lived here with Brady. So that's why if you talk to Tom Rogers, he's older than I am, he would have actually lived in this house with Grandpa. So he'll have way more Grandpa stories since he was here 24/7 with Grandpa. He'll have, and he's older than I am, so he'll have plenty of Brady stories. And he talked to Brady more than I did.
But I understand that they had a snake and it lived in there with Brady a lot. Because some things are legend.
Tommy will know all about the snake, where they got it. Yeah, they had it was a boa constrictor. It was one of their pets that they were fond of.
Snakes used to be around here a lot more because you own a lot of farms. And this had a particular, more black snake. And the black snakes look intimidating. They're not as intimidating as they look because they're long and big and black. But what it is back in the day you had a lot more mice and you had a lot more pigeons and stuff. But the reason you had more and you don't so much now is you had livestock. Whenever you have livestock, you got feed. Whenever you got feed, you got mice and rats and a lot of pigeons, and that's what you got.
Oh, I will tell you one memory of mine as a kid of Grandpa, which was kind of, as I look back now, I think it's kind of funny. In one of the upstairs rooms, there was a giant train set I used to like to play with. It was actually owned by my cousins, the Rogers. They would have been the ones who owned the train set. This is before they moved into the house. But it was upstairs. I suppose it got set up here, wherever they lived. Didn't have room, I don't know. Tommy might know why it happened to be at Grandpa's house, but it's really their toy, it wasn't mine. But when I'd come to see Grandpa, I liked to play with the train. It's kind of neat. But and even my dad, it was his idea too. I guess it's like old farmer ideas. Instead of either my dad or my grandpa going upstairs to, turn the train on or anything, their idea of controlling it is the fuse box was actually in this room. And so they knew which fuse went to that room. And so they would screw the fuse in. So then I could go upstairs and play with the train. And when I was done playing with the train, they just unscrewed the fuse. So they didn't have to worry if I remembered to turn things off. Because if you unscrew the fuse, the lights aren't on anymore, the train's not on anymore. But yeah, that was kind of the old guy way to do it. You could have gone upstairs and just seen if I turned everything off. But they just unscrewed the fuse.
Fuse box was right in that corner.
Is it still there?
No, I got rid of that.
You're right, that's where it was though, yeah.
Yeah, I put in a breaker box, and it's down the basement. It's
Tony modernized stuff.
had to do something. This whole farm run off of that fuse box. I'm talking, went out there, they had wires strung all over the place. You remember that?
Oh yeah.
They didn't care. And yeah, so it took a while, and then we got them underground, most of them, so that's another good thing, because these trees, I mean, I seen one time we went to Florida, and then I come back, and then there was like about 6 or 8 of these giant trees just everywhere. Like, wow.
Of course, I guess the one thing I should mention is the reason, in this day and age, so many people are looking up, who all their relatives are. I run into all kinds of people now that tell me they're related to me, because they like doing that genealogy. The library, I think, has a whole place for genealogy. But the reason most of the people in town are related to me is because Grandma, Brady's wife, she was a Worland. And if you would look at the library, there's a book called One Man's Family. because the Worlands settled very early. So if you're also from a family that was here early on, you end up being related to a lot of people by way of the Worland connection.
Yeah, I'm touching on the woods now a little bit, and the reason that woods is the way it is because it got passed down. And Brady, at his time, run a sawmill, and he wouldn't cut anything off of this section. And it's never been touched. It's been passed and sold to the land trust. And one of the things that Philip's story of the woods is, and I know the tree, and the tree's since fell, and the tree's since kind of rotted. There was an ash tree, and I mean that ash tree was that big around. I mean, it was a whopper. I don't know if you remember the story of the ash tree. And supposedly, somebody come along one time, and it was during the Depression, and they wanted to buy that ash tree, and they told him they'd give him $100, and he said, okay, he'd sell it. And then the next day or two, he told him, he said, no, I decided I'm not going to sell it. But evidently, it was a lot of money at the time for an ash tree. They make baseball bats out of ash trees and handles, I guess.